Okay, and we are live on YouTube now. Still with me?
I'm here.
All right. Yeah. So I don't know if you saw here recently, I'm starting my own team.
I did.
Yeah.
Love the name.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny. I had to, the first thing I was asked was, "Oh, so there's no girls?" No, that's not how it works.
This is 2024. Have you
That's
seen
right.
the most recent movies?
Yep. So yeah, gonna keep it small. 4 or 5 people at the most, and we'll see where it goes. Really, I'm leaning toward more scientific investigation. you know,
Mm.
um, Instead of sitting in a room saying, "Are you there? Can you touch that cat ball?" I want there to be more than that, and that kind of stems from when we were at Unity. I sat in on Lauren Hellickson's lecture and kind of opened my eyes to some things that I was just apparently not even paying attention to. And I'm like, man, that's a good idea. That could work. So we're gonna run it up the flagpole, see how it waves.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. Need to get back down there your way, man. I miss that place. I haven't been there in forever.
Yeah, we were just there. Well, I took some people on a tour this past Saturday.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
they were from out of state, and so
Cool.
we weren't there very long though. So, but we did
Oh,
a full investigation the weekend before, and it was pretty interesting.
yeah. Had some good stuff, huh?
Yeah,
Well, that place never fails to disappoint, that's for sure.
yeah, you're right.
All right, let me check in on YouTube here and then should be ready to go. All right. Hello, YouTube people. Thank you for joining us one more time. Before we get going here, while you're in the live here, click that subscribe button for me. Um, and that way you always have this channel saved. And when we go live, you can tune in right away, watch every episode we'll have. Whoever's here, sound off in the chat. Let me know you're here. And then throughout the interview tonight, if you have some questions for our guest, you can type them down there and we'll make sure we get them answered. And if you're ready, Bob, I'm going to go ahead and hit record.
I'm ready when you are.
All right. Hello, everybody. Sean Coletta with It Came From the Podcast. We are on episode 6. Last week, we had on Father Ken Torres. Um, Always a great conversation with Father Ken. Father Ken has been very important to me in my paranormal journey. He's become a very good friend over the years, and I hope that you enjoyed that. We touched a little bit on the demonic, only because with Father Ken we were going to get factual data and factual things being said instead of "click here, a demon bit my butt." Um, we avoided that, and we talked about uh, the demonic side of things and a little bit of exorcism because he does both. And so if you want to find out the truth about the demonic uh, realm and what all that entails, tune in to episode 5 of It Came From the Podcast. All 5 episodes are now available on your favorite podcast platform. We are nearing the end of spooky season here. We're at the end of October already. I can't believe it. Um, Time has flown by. Lots of guests booked all the way through the end of the year. Don't forget, coming up next Monday, we have with us Sean Austin. You may know Sean Austin from 28 Days Haunted on Netflix. Um, Also, his favorite show that he was on that I shall not name. Uh, we'll talk to him a little bit about that, and we'll see how hard he laughs in person. I've got some great experiences with Sean, great investigations under my belt with Sean, so be sure to tune in for that. But today, I have someone who's also a very special person to me, an amazing person that I got to see a couple weeks ago at Perry Unity down in Peru, Indiana, which is the first time I've seen him in quite a while. He is the occult detective. He's a writer for Vampirella Comics. So if you've ever seen that, you may find that little name down there, Bob Freeman. That's this guy. He's also the owner of an incredible haunted location in Converse, Indiana. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too. Mr. Bob Freeman, thank you for joining me on It Came From the Podcast tonight.
Thanks for having me, Sean. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. I'll have you on anytime you want. We'll do 8 times a year if you want to, because there's always something interesting to talk about with you. um, so, yeah, I saw you a couple weekends ago at Perry Unity over in Peru. Always good to see you, of course. You were there. You had some of your Vampirella comics for sale. You were doing some tarot readings. You had a bunch of really cool books for sale, a little bit of everything. It was a fairly good convention, I'd say. Um, Compared to last year, I think maybe it was a little bit lighter crowd wise, at least it seemed. But the best part of the Perry Unity convention to me is being able to see everybody. And that's kind of what it's about. It's about all of us getting together and being able to see each other, spend some time with each other, attend some incredible lectures, and finding out what everybody's been up to that we haven't seen in a while. So definitely good to see you.
Yeah, I love that convention because it's so, well, it's in my backyard for one thing, so, and everybody comes there to it, and it gives you a chance to, like you said, kind of touch base with everybody. And yeah, this year was a little slower than years past, but yeah, we'll see. It's the economy's not great right now, so some people, just can't afford the gas. So
sure, yeah, not unlike myself. It was tough, but
they're right.
I actually I was invited by the Paravisions team to come down and hang out with them for the day, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to go down there, I'm going to hang out with them and have a good time, and I honestly did. Like I said, always good to see old friends, make some new ones, which I did. And Para Unity is always fun. So pay attention, because next year's Para Unity, you'll probably start hearing about that in January. And if you are local to the Peru, Indiana area, or even an hour or two away, definitely come by, because it's fun. There's so much stuff there, so many different things you can buy, so many people you can talk to, and make some new friends. So, Bob, you, as I mentioned earlier, you have a haunted location down there that you operate.
I do.
I
Yeah,
have been there a handful of times. And why don't you tell us what this location is, and maybe a little bit of background about it?
Sure. Well, first, it's a confidential location. So when you reach out to me, that's, I'll get you in the place, but you're not allowed to post about it online. The actual owners of the building don't want it advertised that the place is haunted. But I've had people from all over the country come and explore there. It is a former Oddfellows Lodge, and that's where most of the activity stems from. It's a 3-story building, and it's active on all 3 floors. It was built in the 1860s, with additional renovations done in the 1880s. And throughout its history, it's served as like doctors' offices, lawyers' offices. It was a speakeasy during Prohibition. There was a brothel there, and all underneath the watchful eye of the Oddfellows Lodge.
Yeah. And like you said, three floors of exciting stuff. It's the kind of place that when you go up there, it's really you don't recognize it as something that would be haunted. It almost looks like, to me, it reminds me of like an old apartment complex that you would find in New York.
Right.
You walk down the halls and you're like, oh, okay, like this could be an apartment over here, and some of them are made up like that as well. Individual rooms all the way down these halls. There's rumored to be a couple of famous people that have passed through there over the years.
It's yeah, very true. John Dillinger in particular. The town I live in, Converse, there was a bed and breakfast where Dillinger would stay, and it's because we are equidistant from Wabash, Peru, Marion, and Kokomo. So he could stay here and venture out to each of those cities and do what he does best. And then he would come back. And in our location, there was a running poker game in one of the lawyers' offices. And supposedly he spent time there and laundered money in those games. So, yeah.
Imagine that. And yeah, through some investigations that I have been on there, and people that I know that have been there as well, lots of different pieces of evidence picked up, especially from the, shall I say, the female worker side of
Yeah.
things.
Right. Yeah. It does happen for sure. Yes.
Yeah, there have definitely been some people working in there. Leah and Mike from L&M Paranormal say hi, Bob. I know Leah and Mike have been to this location too, so they're very familiar with this. But yeah, this is the kind of place I like it because I want to say it's compact, but it's really a large area to cover, especially when it comes to the Oddfellows section. And the one thing I love about you, Bob, is you're a storyteller. And when you're walking people through this place, especially for the first time, you feel like you are kind of stepping into the history. You explained to me how the Oddfellows would get into the lodge part of this location, what that process was, because it wasn't just walk up to the door, say hi, and walk in. There was a process for that. And I'll say that for anybody that goes there, because the way Bob explains it's really cool. But let's talk about the Oddfellows themselves. When some of us in the world of the paranormal, when we think of the Oddfellows, the first thing that comes to our mind is Freemasonry. Is there an association with that, or is that completely separate from the Masons?
They're completely separate from the Masons, but it's a fraternal order, so it's run in very similar fashion. They both come from the same roots, right? So Freemasonry came out of actual Mason guilds, right, who banded together to ensure they got a fair price whenever their workers were going out and plying their trade. So what the Oddfellows were they were centered around small towns. So in a small town, you might only have one mason, one carpenter. So in a time when guilds were very important in protecting employees, what you had were these odd individuals, your carpenters, your bricklayers, what have you. And so they banded together themselves to form kind of a union to ensure fair practices. And as with any fraternal organization, eventually the occult comes into it. They start seeking a spiritual reason for being, and that's kind of the roots of all these fraternities. And the Oddfellows, interestingly enough, and I'm sure anybody that spends any time prowling around graveyards, as I'm sure most of us do, you run into IOOF cemeteries everywhere. And that stands for Independent Order of Oddfellows. So when an Oddfellows Lodge is formed in a community, the first thing they do is they buy a large plot of land and they consecrate a cemetery for people to be buried in. And a lot of their rites were centered around death. I know that, and this was true in our location, they would have a coffin with a skeleton inside. In our case, it was an actual human skeleton, one that had been donated by one of the members. And a petitioner would be placed inside that coffin with that skeleton and locked inside. And then when they were released from it, that person would be reborn. All right. So you're rising from the dead as a new person and a member of that guild. So, yeah, interesting stuff.
Now, why would, as you describe it, a bunch of odd fellows, a bunch of bricklayers and carpenters and stuff like that, when you form something like what they were doing, which, a union or essentially maybe a club, even as a way you could look at it, why would they start getting into the occult? Why would that become necessary for them?
Well, it was sort of a thing that was just it was a fad that grew up, in like the 1600s, where everybody started looking into spirituality, and it just grew from that, right? So, pretty, I mean, as human beings, we're always trying to look into, our reason for being here, and when you're meeting in these, in these organizations, you develop rituals and rites, and it just kind of grows. It was a natural extension of what was essentially a brotherhood at the time. And now in the modern era, men and women both take part in these organizations. But yeah, it was just a way to challenge themselves to find out the way the universe ticked.
Now, does the Oddfellows still exist, or is it a secretive society?
No, they still exist, but like anything, their numbers are dwindling and dwindling fast. Same as with Freemasonry, and it's like anything, in this modern age, people don't have time. There's not the need for that, that brotherhood, that existed in times past. Now people have the internet to occupy their time, video games, television. Whereas then, pre-electricity, what are you doing for entertainment?
Right.
This was a way to get out of the house, have something to do, and and just be not only entertained, but to be a part of something bigger than yourself.
Right.
And it's a shame that that's died off. I mean, that may be part of the reason why we gather in, ghost hunting groups. It's essentially the same thing, right? We're looking for answers,
right?
And we just go about it in a different way.
Okay. Now, were the Oddfellows contributors to the community, or were they more or less secretive? And like, how did that work?
Well, like, in a town the size of Converse, right?
Big city.
Back then, there was like 1,000 people in the town, and that club had, nearly 500 members. Of course, people come from all around, right? Okay. So let's say it's what people did. And, of course, over the decades, those numbers continue to dwindle until when, at the end, there was like 2 people left. And, and that's when the building changed hands. So, but, it's the passage of time is it's cruel to everything. So, and it's been hard on fraternities. So,
yeah, well, that's for sure. There was point in time where, the Masons were, it was very secretive. It wasn't really publicly talked about very much. And if it was talked about more between members and stuff like that. And now you can hop on social media and find ads for the
Right.
Freemasons looking for members, which I think is really, really strange. Um, do you, the Masons themselves, I mean, just in American history in general, are so important to the nation's history. Do you see it eventually maybe going away in the way that the Oddfellows did, or do you think the Masons is a little stronger?
Well, I think the Masons still have roots that I could see it having a resurgence at some point. I've talked to younger people that have been joining lately, especially occultists
Hmm.
who want that. They don't have an oasis or something to belong to, a coven or whatever.
Right.
They can join the Masons and get that that get to scratch that itch.
Sure.
So yeah, I've been seeing a lot more of that. So it's possible. And anybody that doesn't know a lot about Freemasonry, there wouldn't be in America if it weren't for the Freemasons.
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
all of our founding fathers were members. And if you ever want to just get a real kick, sometime look at an aerial picture of Washington D.C.
The
and
pentagram.
you'll see all the monuments and all the roads. They form a pentagram,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
And the city was designed by a Freemason, and
Yep.
the pentagram is an important symbol to Freemasons. It's the symbol of the Eastern Star, for instance.
Mhm.
That's the female sorority attached to Freemasonry.
Mhm.
But yeah, so yeah, it's everywhere. So
Yeah. Actually, Sandusky, Ohio, there is streets that are designed like that as well. It makes a pentagram like that too. So
yeah,
So yeah, I have seen that. Very interesting, and yeah, all the buildings out in Washington, the White House, the Washington Monument, those are all by Masons. So, uh,
yeah.
like you
And
said, a very very important part of our country's history.
yep, they would hold ceremonies, when they place the cornerstone. It was always a Masonic ceremony that was performed
Hmm.
for every one of those buildings.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough in 2000, about 6 months before the Da Vinci Code came out. My
Mm-hmm.
wife and I went to Scotland and we got to visit Roslin Chapel, which is just a it is Freemasonry written stone. This small chapel. It has the master and the apprentice pillars inside, where supposedly the Holy Grail is hidden. Just a majestic place. All kinds of Norse mythology icons everywhere. Uh, but yeah, so you know that is like one of the most important sites in Freemasonry, and I was thrilled. And the reason I bring up that it was before the Da Vinci Code, if you go there now, they have a big tourist center. There's thousands of people going in this place. My
Yeah.
wife and I were there by ourselves the whole day. You know
Mm-hmm.
the the tourist guide comes to us and says, "Hey, you want me to walk you around?" And we're like, "I'm I'm good. Yeah, I've read enough books. I know the place. It's okay." So they just left us be. So we were in there for hours alone. So yeah, that was really something else. Especially considering all the things I'd read over the years, to actually be in that place was something spectacular.
What Bob's not telling us is while he was there by himself, he found the Holy Grail and actually has it on the shelf behind him up at the top. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I think about all that. I don't know if I guess kind of going along with the movies that they've made about it and stuff like that. I mean, do you really think that the Holy Grail is? Do you think it could still exist, or do you think it was something like a wooden cup that probably didn't survive? I mean, we could go off on a whole tangent about this because I really like that kind of stuff. But
Right.
do you think it could survive? Do you think you were
It,
in a place where it probably might have been?
it's I like the idea of it,
Hmm.
and I'm more than happy to look for it because I think the journey is as important as the discovery,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So even if it doesn't exist, just to be pointed in the right direction or in a direction, you
Yeah.
learn a lot about yourself, and
Hmm.
so
Yeah. Well, that's definitely, I think the last time that I talked to you on podcast with the other podcast I was a part of, we went a lot into like the Knights Templar and stuff like that, and of
yeah,
course that always comes back to the Holy Grail, and I think we even talked about Rosslyn Chapel and stuff at that point too. So
yeah,
maybe we'll have to talk about that one of these days too on this podcast because that's always fun to talk about. Um,
yeah.
Bob, you call yourself the occult detective. Why don't you
Yes.
let everybody know why you are the occult detective? What exactly does that mean?
Well, so an occult detective is an individual who uses their knowledge of the occult, extensive knowledge, I would say. You don't you you look beyond just like one particular genre, and but you use all that knowledge to explore the supernatural. And I've used those talents in work with the police, with conservation officers, especially conservation officers where I live. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a lot of cult like activity. And so I ran into a CEO one night. I was reading tarot cards for some friends at a shelter house. And so he started asking me questions. I answered them as truthfully as I could. And then he asked me, "Well, do you want to go see something? I could, use your expertise on this." I said, "Sure." I followed him out into the woods to where there was a circle inscribed, a cat that had been crucified, and strange symbols about. And so I examined the area for him, gave him, what information I could. And then they started calling me whenever stuff like that came up. So that's pretty much what an occult detective does, right? They help people when they need it, and use their knowledge to try to answer questions,
Okay.
solve mysteries.
Now, do you have for the people that are listening or watching? Do you have any type of abilities yourself?
I would not say so. I can. I have an intuition,
Yeah.
but I think it's the same as anybody that does this.
Hmm.
Anybody that's investigated the paranormal for any length of time develops that kind of gut instinct,
That's
right?
for sure. Yeah.
I can use divining rods, I can use tarot cards, I can use pendulums, I can use the tools of the trade
Hmm.
that give me answers to questions. But I don't consider myself any more psychic than anyone is.
Okay.
So
Okay. Um, so another thing that I want to talk about here. I have always loved comic books growing up. My favorite superhero is Superman, always has been. Got a tattoo of him on my arm. Um, Not the most believable superhero. The big debate is, well, Superman versus Batman. Batman could really exist. Yeah, he probably could. Superman could exist too if you're believing the kind of stuff we believe in. Um,
right.
let's talk about Vampirella. You're a writer for Vampirella now. Vampirella has been around for many, many, many years. When I was a
Almost as long as
kid,
I have. Yeah.
it has been around for quite a while. How many years? I mean, well, I remember when I
She
was a
came out in
kid.
'69. Yeah.
Okay, so it's
Came
been
out in
around for a
'69.
while because I remember
Yeah.
when I was a kid. Those covers were always a little on the risque side.
Yeah.
Um, And I mean, there's still beautiful artwork. I mean, just amazing stuff, which you don't see very much anymore. Um, how in the world did you become associated with such a, uh, what do I want to say? Do I want to say famous or just extremely well known comic book like Vampirella?
Yeah, I got really lucky, and it all came about because of a fantasy animated film. I was a big fan of this movie called Fire and Ice, which was by Ralph Bakshi and Frank Frazetta. Sure, most of you have heard of Frank Frazetta. He's the grand master, the grand, of fantasy art, just this masterful painter. And Ralph Bakshi had posted, some stuff about Fire and Ice on Twitter. And I said, hey, when are you going to make a role playing game about that? And I was contacted by Sarah Frazetta, the granddaughter of Frank, and she said, hey, could you do that? Could you create a role playing game based on Fire and Ice? And I said, absolutely. So we started a partnership and I started working on that. So while that's going on, Dynamite Comics got involved. They wanted to do a Fire and Ice comic and wanted to be involved in the game we were creating. And they asked Sarah if she wanted to write a Vampirella series. And she came to me and she said, Bob, I'm not a writer. I have ideas, but I'm not a writer. Would you do this with me? And I said, absolutely. It's a dream come true. I was a big Vampirella fan growing up. So uh, Sarah and I would sit on the phone and she would tell me ghost stories about her growing up around her grandfather. They lived in a haunted house in Pennsylvania. And so she would tell me all this and the weird stuff that went on, and we developed a story with Vampirella in it. Frank is a character in the comic,
Mm.
and yeah, it was one of the highlights of my career for sure. And this coming Wednesday, the trade paperback edition, which collects the first 4 issues, will be released. So
Okay.
if you're interested, Vampirella, Dead Flowers, yeah, this Wednesday you get a nice big meaty story, all in between 2 covers. And we worked with a great artist from Italy, Alberto Locatelli, and we did some cover work ourselves on the book. So yeah, it was a lot of fun and a great character.
Now, you yourself actually did a couple of the comic covers. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah, and that's a really proud moment for me. It was like I said, it was a dream come true.
yeah, for sure. What do you think has led to that comic being around for so long? What do you, and any comic for that matter, what do you think makes that longevity happen?
Well, okay, like with Vampirella, let's be honest, it's a titillating, character, right? She's
Mhm.
beautiful, one piece bathing suit, you
Mhm.
know, and it's very enticing for young boys, young men. They love that sort of thing. The trick is to take that kind of cheesecake and develop a story, that is entertaining, that goes beyond that factor. And that's one of the things we did was we developed a story that was very gothic romance oriented, to place her in it. So and if you look at any comic, the most successful, of course, have been the superhero comics
Mhm.
that came up out of the pre-war era and just
Mhm.
kept going. And a lot of that came about because of the 1960s, where before kids kind of read comics for a few years and then they moved on and did adult things. When the 60s happened, for whatever reason, boys just didn't quit reading comics. And I think a lot of that was because the stories became a lot more adult.
Mm,
Especially in the '60s, the hippie era, right? They started having social issues, and they started using them as a vehicle to tell actual meaningful stories rather than just the pow bam bang.
hmm.
People began to take it as literature, and so and really it was Marvel Comics, where they decided to do a universe that could be right outside your window.
Right.
That's I love the idea of like Spider-Man being a teenage kid with teenage kid problems, and
Hmm.
yet got to go fight, the absorbing man or something. It's like,
Yeah.
uh, but there was something very real about that universe, and I think DC Comics picked up on that, and that just it becomes a part of people's lives because they see themselves in it. And
Hmm.
the more they do that, the more comics will keep going.
Right. And I think the one thing that's really unique about the comic book space is that, unlike movies and Hollywood, these movies are designed and made spending millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars in order to make back hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. The comic books are not designed for that. Now, you've got your spin-offs, you've got your different stories, Marvel's got the multiverse, but the comic the comic book realm really hasn't changed. It's still designed to be enjoyed, and the price of comic books is still relatively reasonable. They haven't skyrocketed in price. So I
Yeah,
think the comic books are designed so people can, so they're still affordable, so more people can buy them. And now with all these movies coming out, people will go back and find out the backstories to these characters. So I think comic books will always be around. The film industry could completely crash and another movie could never be made, but you can always go back to these comics. Even as adults, people will say, "Oh, you read comic books? You're a nerd." Okay, I'll take that. I love my Deadpool. I love my Superman, um, and and it's also kind of like what we do as paranormal researchers or investigators. It's an escape. It's an
yeah,
escape from the mundane. It's an escape from the reality to be able to put yourself in a situation that, in the comic book end of it, you probably would never actually be in, but it's cool to put yourself there. And like you said, the stories have gotten deeper and they've gotten real. So, it's not, Batman uh, getting a phone call from the commissioner and bop, bop, bam, fighting the Joker and taking him off to jail. It's gotten so deep to the point where I believe they're doing a comic book sequel to Tim Burton's Batman. I
oh
just
yeah,
saw this
yeah,
the other day, and it's going to fill in gaps in the movie and kind of do some explanations. So, even so, we're still going back 30 years and bringing this stuff back. And I think it's fantastic. It keeps us young, I think. um, and, lets us know that even though we're all a bunch of geeks, all this stuff's being made for us. And if I had the money, I'd be buying all these amazing statuettes and all this crazy stuff they have
yeah.
nowadays. I've seen some Frazetta ones actually that are just incredible. Like, yeah, it's amazing. So anybody that's listening, if you ever come across Bob Freeman out in the wild somewhere and he's got comic books with him, he's got ones that he's written or done covers on. So get one, he'll sign it for you, and you can take it home and add it to your collection. Um, I need to get one from you one time because I really think it would be cool to have one that's graded and signed by you. I think that'd be really cool.
Oh,
So I
yeah,
don't
we'll
know.
make sure that happens.
I'm just a bit of a nut. I don't know. But yeah, as those of you that are listening to this podcast may know already, um, we could sit here and we could talk to Bob for another hour. But what we're going to do is we're going to have Bob back on again sometime in the future. As these episodes, we like to keep between 30 and 40 minutes. And that's kind of about the point where we're at right now. But Bob, I want you to take a moment and let everybody know where they can get in touch with you on social media and kind of follow along with you in your journey, and how they can contact you or get in touch with you to possibly set up visiting your location. Again, as we have mentioned earlier, the location is not one that is for general public knowledge. So when you're there, Bob asks that you don't share this location with anybody. Um, it's one of those places that you want to keep secret for the community. But if you're a part of the community and you get in touch with Bob, he might let you come out and investigate. But we want to,
You'll
this is
become
one of
part of the
those
family.
rare, yeah, this is one of those rare situations where, Bob's not out there saying, hey, come visit my location. It's a special place run by a very special person in Bob, and we want to keep it that way. And so far, it's gone just fine. That respect level is there. So let everybody know where they can find out and follow you and get all that good information about.
Sure. Well, I'm a cult detective on all the like X, Facebook, Instagram. I also run occultdetective.com, or I have a blog that gets updated far too infrequently. But so the best way to get a hold of me is through social media. Just reach out and we'll line something up. And if you're of a mind, I've got books for sale on Amazon. Just look them up by my name, and yeah, it's what I do. It's like my primary focus is the paranormal, and I got a lot of nerdy side pursuits.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I got to learn a lot of nerdy side. I can't even say it. A lot of nerdy side pursuits myself. That's a tongue twister. But yeah, like I said, guys, get in touch with Bob if you want to maybe get access to this location. If you want to learn a thing or two, start a conversation with Bob. If you have questions when it comes to history, I mean, going back 600 plus years, you can have conversations with Mr. Freeman about that because he knows a lot about a lot, and that's always a good trait to have. So, yeah, reach out to him, and you won't regret it. That's for sure. Bob, thanks a lot for taking some time out tonight. We're definitely going to have to do this again for sure. And I need to get down and see you sometime soon. We'll have to talk and see when you got some ability to get a friend or two to maybe bring down with me, but we'll see. So
Great.
Thank you all for joining us on this amazing episode of It Came From the Podcast. Be sure to join us next week as we're going to have a wonderful chat with Sean Austin. Sean's got a new project in the works. He's got a brand new app out. I am not big on apps in the paranormal, but this one is a whole lot different, and we'll dive into that and talk about that as well. Bob, thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of the night. Those of you that joined us on YouTube, thank you very much. Some of you are coming in way too late because we're done. And those of you that are listening to this podcast, please subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll talk to you next time. There we go. It took me a minute to find the button.
All right. That went well.
Yeah, Lee Allen, Paravision's Paranormal Society just joined here on YouTube. Yeah, you're a little late, buddy. But that's okay because I'll have this episode up probably within the next hour, and you can download it and give it a listen. Yeah, we're starting to take off here. Only 6 episodes in, and I've got listeners in Massachusetts, Texas, Iowa, Indiana. It's really weird, like weird spattering of states.
Yeah, right.
But
we'll just keep growing. I mean,
yeah, we're just getting started. So, but yeah, I appreciate you, Bob. Thank you very much. I'll be in touch with you, and see what we can't work out to hang out together for a while.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.